Thank you for coming, everyone. It was just before midnight on the eve of Julia's birthday. Asher stepped out onto the moonlit balcony of their Florence hotel, gazing at her with such tenderness and affection that Julia actually blushed. She must have known on some level what was coming. She'd vaguely registered the brilliant flash of diamond, the shimmering platinum band. She subconsciously noted Asher's uncharacteristically tentative demeanor, a far cry from the powerhouse facade he generally presented to the world, as he slowly, deliberately, even humbly, lowered himself onto one knee, holding her eyes the entire time. Yes, of course she must have known. How could she not? But even so, she felt a delightful bafflement as to what her intimate partner of almost 2 years could possibly be up to. In fact, she'd had to restrain herself from blurting out, "Asher, sweetheart, what are you doing?" But she hadn't. She'd remained quiet, for once abandoning her chronic and largely futile struggle for control of everything and anything around her, most especially her own emotions, instead allowing the anticipation, the excitement, the beauty of the moment to build and bubble up inside her. Incredibly, this phenomenal male creature was directing his words at her, Julia Jones, a woman of moderate intelligence, attractiveness, and success. Your average, above average, 33, almost 34-year-old woman. "Darling," Asher whispered. "Julia?" She nodded encouragingly, touched by his vulnerability. Asher cleared his throat and paused to brush a lock of his thick, dark hair from his eyes, a gesture which prompted a small smile from Julia. Asher was so commanding, so certain of what he wanted and what was important in life, and yet he could never quite control that longish, unruly hair of his. Perhaps inspired by the works of art they'd seen today, here in the birthplace of the Renaissance, her fingers suddenly itched to paint him. Of course, she'd never be able to fully capture his essence in a portrait. He was a masterpiece, not just physically, but in every sense. She regarded him fondly, feeling herself coming dangerously close to losing herself in his deep brown eyes, yet still she didn't resist. The sensation was electrifying, but electrically so. It was terrifying, but electrically so. No more holding back, she'd thought. Finally, after a lifetime of playing it safe, she'd managed to let go completely. "You're wonderful, Julia," he said. "I love you. I more than love you. I feel..." It sounds preposterous.
Soundtrack.
But I feel as if you've saved me. You helped me discover myself, my authentic self, the part of me I thought I'd lost forever. And not only did you accept that part of me, here he paused to shake his head in wonderment, that's the part of me you love the most. I can't even begin to tell you how much that means to me. Tears had welled up in Julia's eyes. And in that moment, she'd seen tears in his eyes too. "More than anything," he said, "I want to be your husband, and I want you to be my wife." And then he said it. "Will you marry me, Julia? Will you let me love you? Will you let me love you forever?" Now, to be fair, despite what he'd said about her profound understanding of his most authentic self, Julia didn't feel she'd seen quite all of Asher. He'd certainly seen all of her, not since her beloved mother, who died tragically in a plane crash when Julia was only 11 years old, had there been anyone to whom she'd so willingly bared her soul. Asher, however, was a different story. Even in their most intimate moments, there seemed to be a part of him that he kept closely guarded, a part which, she suspected, might forever remain solitary. Still, she felt little cause for concern. She'd chalked it up to his being an only child, a byproduct of the self-sufficiency he'd been forced to develop as a little boy in a world of high-powered adults. And besides, wasn't that the nature of human relationships in general? When it came right down to it, did anyone really know anyone? The point was, Asher loved her. And for those few brief moments in the moonlight, Julia at last allowed herself to feel the love of a man who was handsome, charismatic, and successful, and more importantly, generous. constant and unfailingly kind, a man of character and integrity who could have had his pick of women. His last girlfriend had been a Slovakian supermodel, for God's sakes, and yet who wanted her. And so, on that balcony in Florence, Julia summoned the courage to do what she longed all her life to do: respond to love's invitation with a joyous, unqualified yes. By then it was after midnight, June 14th. "Happy birthday," Asher whispered, kissing her ardently on the lips. "The happiest," she said, kissing him back. They'd gone on to celebrate this, the official start of their shared forever, by making love in the canopied hotel bed in the remaining sweet dark hours of the night. Julia found herself responding to Asher's touch more fully and completely than ever before. That miraculous word, engaged, reverberating gloriously through the deepest recesses of her heart, her mind, her very soul. Indeed, it had seemed as if every cell of her being was joyously proclaiming her newfound status to the universe: engaged. And so she had been. What she hadn't realized, however, was that engagements don't necessarily go according to plan. So now my friend Lynette Ingram will be doing an author interview, and we'll follow with a short Q&A. So ponder your questions.
Okay. First of all, romance novel style, right? Yeah. And this is actually this novel might be referred to as an anti-romance novel. And those of you who've read it know exactly what I'm talking about. And this is one of its strengths. So, in the upending that Chrissy smartly did of the romance novel genre, she starts with the engagement. And most of the time, romance novels end with the engagement, and then we have, the expectation of the happily ever after. So, in your novel, the engagement is actually the beginning of all the conflicts for Julia. How does this go?
Well, I certainly don't want to give everything away.
No, we're not doing spoilers on anything.
Spoilers,
yeah. But let's talk about early conflicts then that result after her engagement, after the fantasy, and she thinks, "Oh, he's chosen me," and and she's so fortunate.
Well, I've always been fascinated by this concept of whether we do truly know other people. So that's why I loved injecting that into the prologue, because I think it's a question we all wrestle with. You feel like you know people, but do you know them completely? And obviously I bring a lot of myself to Julia, but what I think you'll see in her is just a lot of questioning. There's a question and there seems to be an answer. There seems to be a resolution, but is it really a resolution? Is it really an answer? And so I like it's one of the things in life I find frustrating. You feel like you figured it out, and then suddenly something else happens, and you realize you didn't figure anything out at all. So I like kind of the false solve.
Right. And at the end of a traditional romance novel, the engagement is the answer. I mean, everything leads toward that. And I like the way you wrote your prologue in traditional romance style, because it's really... Part of this book is satire. It's other things as well. It has several layers, but it's partly satire, and there's a lot of humor. But it's a very serious concept, because it's about knowing ourselves and what about Julia? You center your novel around her. What are her strong points as a character? As a person?
I think she's reflective. I think she knows herself fairly well. She sees her flaws, her own flaws. She doesn't think she's perfect. Her self-esteem is a little wobbly at times. But at the end of the day, I do think she has a core sense of who she is. And so some of the interim developments may be a little shaky. She may question herself, but I feel like she's got like that solid foundation at her core. And
She's somebody we like.
yeah, I like
she's
Julia.
someone we can like for a good many reasons. But since she's your heroine, how did you, as a writer, keep her from being too good to be true? You know, we all want our main characters to be liked by our readers. And so how did you think about that?
Yeah, that was something I struggled with, actually, not just with Julia, but with my characters in general, because when I started writing this book, as you know, this is my debut, so I've never come to this point with a novel, so it's thrilling to share that process with all of you. Thank you, yeah. But it was funny because when I was developing my characters, I sort of felt like they all had to have everything figured out. They all had to great jobs that they loved, and none of them could have substance abuse issues or family issues or anything. And then I realized, wait a second, what world is that? Who wants to read that?
You've left out conflict.
But as for Julia herself, one of the points that I credit an old friend from Boston. He said to me, "Who's your opposition character?" And I had started writing this book with everyone just liking Julia. Everyone just loved her. She's great. And then, realized, no, again, that's not life too. Even good people have haters and people who just aren't a fan. And so that was how the opposition character, Byron, who was based on a real person.
Oh, yeah.
Loosely, and on an experience that I myself had in Boston. So just having those uncomfortable moments where feeling like someone really just has it in for you.
And you made Julia a vegan also. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I think it's her nature. Julia was going to turn vegan, whether I made her vegan or not.
Okay.
She has a life of her own. But as I shared with a few people before we got into the official event, I was not a vegan when I started writing the book.
Really?
And then when I went vegan, like many of us radical vegans, you can't have a heroine who's... Julia became vegan with me. Wow. So... yeah, I was early in the book. It didn't require a dramatic change.
We learn, it's not window dressing in this novel. It's very much a part of who she is. And of course, a lot of times with new writers and when they're experimenting with a new genre, they think, oh, we've got to have these interesting aspects to the character. But in this case, she is not using her vegan philosophies and practices or you're not using it as window dressing. There's a line I really like in the novel. One of the characters said, "Yeah, she's vegan, but not one of those annoying vegans." She's not that type. I don't remember who said it, but it's a great line. Another original thing that you did in terms of the anti-romance approach to your subject, when Julia gets engaged, she has met, as you pointed out in the prologue, the man who's really her romantic fantasy. Well, most women's romantic fantasy, probably. And then a crisis happens. So tell us about that. Her first big conflict.
With the castle?
Yeah, with the castle.
Okay. This isn't giving too much away, but Julia discovers that there's possibly a financial motive injected into this union to be, because Asher's family has a trust that has a provision in it where he will inherit a castle when he gets married. Okay. And Julia is a purist, and she has trouble getting outside of black and white thinking, and just the fact that there could possibly be a motive that for his wanting to marry her, apart from just their genuine true love, just bugs the crap out of her.
Right, and her friends are all saying, "Oh no, he's what he appears to be," and she's the one, because we've already begun to know her as someone who's sensible and down to earth most of the time. That she's going to question, but she pretty much convinces herself, okay, this is real. And another thing you did that played into this, a technique you used in this novel, you have a few fairy tale overtones, and that adds to the humor, but it also helps us kind of understand where the story's moving and the kinds of things we've thought about. At what point did you decide to inject those?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you picked up on the satirical component earlier, because those of you who know me know that I'm a little bit wry, and I'm a big fan of irony. And so I really had fun with that, just the traditional romance, the fairy tale feel,
Yes.
and it feeling over the top and playful and fun, but just enough too much in there that makes you wonder, could it be for real?
Right.
So I had a lot of fun with that. So I really enjoyed kind of just, nudging the romance trope out of its box.
Yes, and that was also fun to read because there's always this play between, okay, we see that this fairy tale might be heading in the opposite direction, but what does the character see? Does the protagonist see it this way too? Because she's really invested here, and she's a good person, and she wants it to be the way she thinks it's going to be. Now, this castle thing, of course, as you pointed out, is a question in her mind. But there are two other male characters who are major characters in the novel, and they are both interested in Julia. And another way in which you veered away from the traditional romance novel trope is that they're not jerks. When you have the protagonist, you have the engagement, you have something that is complicated that happens to mess up the engagement. Oh, here come two guys, and they're both good looking and they're both interested, but they're not jerks. You avoid all of the and this again plays into the genre and the expectations and the stereotypes of the romance genre. And you completely avoid this by your characterization of the other two men. So tell us about them, because you did such a good job with your male characters, and that doesn't always happen.
Thank you. I didn't set out to not make them jerks. Their
characters improved.
Well, as we know with people in general, everybody has their pros and their cons, and someone who's a great person in one moment can truly be a jerk in another moment. So you say they're not jerks, but they have their moments. They have their moments of acting like jerks.
They are three-dimensional characters. And what I was referring to when I said they're not jerks, usually in a romance novel, there will be a guy who is a user. There will be a guy who has a secret life. There will be some, you know these types. Yeah. If you don't, you're fortunate. If you want a refresher, watch Lifetime movies, and you'll see them. But you won't see them in this novel, because even though all three male characters are three-dimensional and they do bad things at bad times, we don't have any cardboard villains here. So who did you base, not who, but what kinds of qualities, that's a bad question, what qualities did you want your male characters to have in this novel?
I wanted them to be different from one another. I wanted them to have different strengths. And again, I wanted to buck some stereotypes. Again, I didn't set out with that agenda consciously, but I just wanted, I love the idea in life and just the theme of, the second you've got something figured out or someone figured out, they buck your expectations and make you realize, no, there's more to this person, there's more to this situation. And I think it's because I myself as a person, I'm always so desperate to figure things out and just get it finally solved. And okay, now I can rest easy and not worry the rest of my life. So I relate. So I like to it's a masochistic tendency in myself. Like, oh, the second it seems clear what this person is like and whether they're good or bad or, a villain or a hero.
And that's what
just
gives
to
them
keep it
such
guessing,
complexities.
But
because,
it was fun because I really enjoyed the qualities of all the males. Asher is just, upstanding and just, kind of the classical hero. David Meadow, the interior designer, he's just Mr. Charisma, life of the party, fun, nonstop action. And he's the one that I feel like was very tempting to make a jerk. And he may be or he may not be. I won't give it away. Same with Asher. And then, Sean Harris, kind of the classical, all-American, every schoolgirl's crush.
And where did she know
Mr.
him
Nice
first?
Guy. Pardon me?
Where did she know Sean to begin with?
He was
this
her
kind of plays into the fantasy part.
Exactly, yes. He was her high school crush. So, nothing like that high school crush.
Yeah, but I think this was one of the interesting characterization points that you did with Julia, because even though she's sensible, she's practical, she's emotionally mature, she still has a bit of a romantic fantasy about the high school crush. And here he is, and she's engaged, and he shows up, and she is attracted, and on and on. And yet, as this plays out, you're not reading a traditional romance novel with the two guys competing against each other and that kind of thing. But each of these characters, the male characters, as they show their different sides, they bring out different qualities within Julia. And the one I noticed about Sean is that, okay, you're reminding us through him, she still has a few high school fantasies. She's achieved a lot in her life. Tell us about her career, for example.
Her career, so she's essentially a stalled artist. She's an artist at heart. That was always her dream, her plan. And then just to make ends meet, she works part-time for a travel company, and then after college she gets a full-time job there, intending to still paint on weekends and paint in the evenings, and gradually just life gets in the way and that falls by the wayside. So she's someone who's accomplished things, and she has a job that's meaningful in the nonprofit sector. She started this organization that helps children travel and see the world. So she has a meaningful job, but it's just not how she saw her life. She saw her life as being an artist, being a true creative, not sitting behind a computer, updating Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah, but she has to pay the bills.
She has to pay the bills.
And she has her job, as you've created the job for her, is another good character point. It shows that she cares about people. She's not making much at this nonprofit.
Right.
And she really cares about growing it and raising money for it, and cares about the teenagers who get the grants and the opportunities as a result of the nonprofit. Julia has, and I'm not going to give away too much, but she has a big setback. You can tell as much as you choose to tell about this, but she has a big setback, which is quite devastating in the novel. What's a novel without conflict? We've talked about how good these characters are, but still, we've got to have something that moves the novel along. And she has a surprising, very serious setback. And this is the point at which the novel really seems to take off for me, because she doesn't do the romance heroine kind of thing like, oh, I'll never find another man, or it's just not fair. Well, it isn't fair. And she also has the problem of having no idea why it happened. It was a betrayal. She has no idea what she did to deserve it, but she goes on with her life. She tries to find out, but she also continues to try to find out what's good for her. And one of the best points you make, I think, is that she doesn't change herself in order to attract a man. And she doesn't get the two male characters, the friends, in competition over her. Now, how did you work out who she was going to be after the betrayal?
Yeah, that was tricky because the whole theme of this novel is just, that whole, you think you've got it figured out and then something else. So that particular setback that you're referencing was that just on a grander, more dramatic scale. So just the concept that I think we all wrestle with as humans, just when the whole image you had of what your life is going to look like is just suddenly out the window. What the heck do you do? Like, who are you and what matters when something that you were counting on and just really trusted in as your destiny, your fate, what your whole existence was going to be is just gone. And, again, I feel like that's something we all wrestle with, men and women alike. I think women especially so in some ways, just because we're sort of indoctrinated with this notion that, our real life begins when that Prince Charming, that Mr. Right comes along, and that's when, suddenly we're validated and proven worthy of, the real life. That's when our real life begins. And so again, not giving anything away, but yeah, just that whole concept of like, this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what I had in mind. Now where do I go from here?
It's painful, right?
It's
where do
painful,
I go from here?
yeah.
Because
So it's not pretty, but again, it's just a process of reevaluation. And I think a big component for me too was just having her keep her sense of humor. Even in her darkest, most depressed moments, she's a deep soul. She's not like lighthearted in a lot of ways, but at the same time, I think she has a sense of humor about herself. So that was something that was important to me too.
Yeah, and that goes all the way through, and she doesn't lose herself. She doesn't make herself over for a man. Again, another anti-romance novel trait. How is she different in the end? At the end of this conflict, it's finally solved. She finally understands why the betrayal happened, and she is forced to think about things in a different way after that, but she grows from that. And so when she figures out what she's going to do about the other two guys who are interested in her and about the betrayal, once she finds out the reasons, how does she change?
I think she fundamentally, her essence doesn't change, her core doesn't change, but I think she just gets more comfortable and settles more into who she already is. And also there's a certain freedom when everything just goes completely south, because you kind of can stop trying to control everything and orchestrate everything. So there's a weird freedom. And so I think she experiences some of that where, the whole life I had in mind is not an option anymore. So who knows? So I may as well stop trying to control things because it's not going to work. So I think she just lightens up a little bit and starts rolling with things a little more and just starts appreciating somewhat the unexpected nature of life. She's not quite as interested in controlling everything because she realizes, sometimes those unpredictable moments are really what makes life incredible. And I don't want to know the future. I don't want to know all the answers. I'm kind of curious to find out as I go along.
And she starts painting again.
Yes. So she channels her angst into her artist self. Yes.
There is a male character, and you referred to him earlier, but I want you to say more about him. There is a male villain in this novel. It's not one of the romantic guys, but there's a male villain who sets out to sabotage. Julia doesn't know she has any enemies, but she has one who comes into her company with an agenda. And he's very good at what he does, being underhanded and other things. So tell us a bit about him and how he affects the plot of the novel and how he affects her.
He adds to the questioning component because, again, this was loosely based on an experience I had where I had a very unpleasant conflict with someone, a neighbor in Boston in the North End. And I remember it really troubled me at the time because, kind of like Julia, I had this naive impression of life. I thought, you go through life, you're a good person, you try to be generally kind and nice, and so surely no one's going to hate you. Like how do you make enemies if you're just going through life? And so when that happened to me personally with somebody, the guy had some issues for sure, but I just remember it really messed with my head a little bit. And like how could I inspire this just intense enmity in somebody when I'm just kind of going along, just doing my thing. And so I had a friend at the time who I was sharing this story with. And she said to me, I think it's actually boring. Like, if somebody goes through life and doesn't make any enemies and doesn't have anyone dislike them, then they don't really have much personality or character. So that was a good piece of input for me. And so with Julia, I think she's a questioner by nature, a self-doubter by nature. So this just fuels the self-doubt. And then also, I think one really troubling component for her was that people that she likes and respects liked this person.
Yes, I was just going to ask you about that.
That was the thing that really gets to her.
She sees red flags in the beginning, but she thinks, oh, maybe that's just, my attitude, or maybe it's just a bad vibe or something. And she has nothing to go on. But they're all telling her what a wonderful job he's doing, but he really has a plan. He's a real enemy. He's not just someone who doesn't like her.
Right.
And that adds to the conflict of the novel, and it's a really good subplot because we wonder all the way through, okay, how's this going to go? Is it going to be exposed? First we wonder, is he really as bad as she suspects? Mm-hmm. And yes, he's probably worse. And then what is she going to do about it? And so that's one of the additional strengths of the novel, I think. The way that is resolved, an interesting. It shows Julia's actual problem-solving skills, and that she is not afraid to take on conflict. And as the evolution of that character, as you were writing her, as you were thinking about her, at the end, did you see her as someone, you mentioned it's freeing to want to stop controlling things. Did you also see her as a person who was freed by giving up her fantasies? And some of those, I saw that in the novel, and I thought, oh, that's a really good turn, because she's given up her romance fantasies, yet her life is not poorer for that. She has a much richer life. It's just a more grown-up life.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. The childish fairy tale is gone, and instead she has an adult life.
Yeah, and she wasn't hooked on it anyway, not the way typical romance heroines are. But we all have fantasies. We all romanticize some aspect of life.
Sure.
And at that point, I thought it was an interesting commentary just on the culture. We're just so exposed to romantic fantasies of all sorts, whether it involves a love relationship, whether it involves adoption, whether it involves what families should be like. We all have idealized notions of human relationships, and you did such a good job dissecting this and moving it toward a really positive ending in your storyline. One of the this is my last question, but I think it's the thing I got most out of your novel. That when I finished reading it, I was thinking about where the character is at the end versus where she was at the beginning. I thought, okay, what are some overall themes of this novel? What are the things to get from this novel? And the thing I came up with was, this is a novel that distinguishes between romance and love. Did you have that in mind when you wrote it? Because that's really what she does. There's a lot of love. We talk about the anti-romance novel, but that's genre fiction. But there's a lot of love in this novel. It's not the kind she started out believing she wanted.
But no, that's a great way of encapsulating it. I hadn't articulated it for myself that way, but I like that description. That makes a lot of sense. Because, yeah, there is a lot of love. And the fairy tales are debunked. Yeah, I would agree. I'm glad you took that from it, because that was, that was what it was all about.
That
love, where is love? How do we find it? We all want it. Where do we get it? And
And one way we get it is giving up the fantasies that even if we're smart and accomplished and intelligent, we're still human, and we still hold on to those, whatever they may be.
Yeah, perfect.
So
thank you. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. You guys are so nice. Thank you. And now we're going to do maybe just 5 or 10 minute Q&A if anyone has anything they'd like to ask. Yes.
Okay, so what started the idea of writing this book?
I'm glad you asked that, because it just didn't fit my line of questioning, and I wanted somebody to ask that. So I want to hear this.
It's a very funny story. I'll try to make it concise, but I had a friend in Boston where I lived who was very artsy, fun. We were pretty tight for a while. She was also pretty flaky. She came to me and said, I've done all this research. I like to write. I know you like to write. The only genre that's making money these days is romance and women's fiction, chick lit. She said, so let's write a chick lit book together. And at the time I thought, well, my ambitions are a little grander than romance, I thought, but it'll be fun. Sure, I'll do it. Why not? I hadn't been writing much, and this would prompt me into writing. So we got together and talked some rough plot for the book. It was going to be this woman who was engaged to this dream of a man, and things don't quite work out the way she envisioned. So that was as far as we got in terms of the plot planning. And then we went our separate ways. We were going to each write chapters every week, trade chapters, work on this together. So I went off, wrote the first chapter of the book, sent it off to her to get her feedback. And like I said, she was a great girl, and we've gotten back in touch. But I never heard from her again. Essentially, she just kind of fell off the face of the planet. It wasn't like she wasn't particularly ghosting me, but she was just flaky in general. And it was part of her charm, but it was her strength and her weakness. She was just fun and got these ideas, and she would start some things and wouldn't finish. So at that point, I was really annoyed. I stewed about it for about a week or two because I was so annoyed she hadn't responded to, what I had written and everything. And then I thought, well, screw her. I'll just finish the thing myself, because I had started writing it and I had already gotten engaged with the story, pun intended. And I thought, yeah, I like this story, and I'll just finish it out. And I thought I'll bang it out in 6 months. And now, now 10 plus years later, here we are. So that's how it came to be. So I reached out, just to wrap that up, I reached out to that woman. I finally found her through social media, and she loved hearing that the book is coming out in the world, and she's, already posted several reviews, and she's just very excited. But it wouldn't have happened
was a
if not for her.
catalyst, yeah.
She was a catalyst, exactly. Yeah,
She's
yeah.
not gonna get credit. No, she's
No, she didn't do the work.
She didn't write.
The
She didn't write
ideas
any
are
of the
the
book.
easy
Yeah,
parts.
yeah.
That's awesome.
Any other questions?
Tracy, how much of the book is like based on real life? Like page numbers, like the sex scenes, like
The sex scenes.
how much of that is real?
I have to think. Yeah.
He's blushing.
Yeah, my boyfriend's in the room, so. Yeah, I did bring a lot of my personal life to the book. Not particularly the main plot lines were not autobiographical. Yeah.
No castles.
No castles. Yeah.
Were the people like actually based on? Like, I know you said the one guy was, but like the other people, what was your inspiration for the characters?
Yeah, the villain was based on somebody. Yeah, I would have, there's someone loosely parallel to Sean Harris, the character Sean Harris. Not the same person by any stretch. David Meadow was, loosely based on someone that I'd heard about from close family member. And then, yes, Byron the villain, that came directly from personal experience. And then there are just little details in the book that come from my personal life that people who know me well, probably spotted when they read the book. For instance, there's a cat named Olive in the book. And my first cat was named Olive. So just little details like that no one else would pick up on, but I had fun just knowing they were in there. They mean something to me. Yes.
So how many publishers did you pitch it to?
We pitched, well, the first step was finding a literary agent. So I submitted to quite a few literary agents. They're so flooded with manuscripts that I just viewed it as a numbers game. And talking about Excel spreadsheets, I had an Excel spreadsheet documenting all the places I submitted to, what I'd heard back. And then after that, my agent, Jane Von Marin, who's in New York City, she had people in mind to shop it around to. So she submitted it a few places.
You
And
started out with an agent first.
yes, yeah. So we can take one more question.
Great book.
Thanks, friend. And before the last question, let me just thank Kay and Susan for this incredible event. Yeah. Talk about reality being better than what you could control or predict, because the fact that we're all here in this incredible home, I mean, Kay is a gift beyond measure, and I just can't thank you enough. But I'll try. Yes.
You have this beautiful display of books behind you. Tell us a little bit about, if you want, share a little bit of the story of why the cover looks so amazing.
Yes.
Yeah, you're very proactive in that. And then also, where are these books from? Where can we get them?
Well, for one, thank you to Bound Booksellers for facilitating these sales and this lovely display. I can't imagine how beautiful it looks. But as for the cover, yeah, that's kind of a funny story, because my publishing company, typically, for those of you who don't know how the publishing business works, which I've learned a lot this past year, but typically the publisher is in control of the cover. So they dictate, they pick it, they decide on it. The author doesn't have any say. I'm working with an independent publisher where they do take a little more input from their authors. But originally, they were going to come up with the cover, and they asked me what style I wanted and what I had in mind. So I sent them all this information and all this input, and then they came back to me with this cover that looked It looks like the cover of a Disney coloring book, is how my friend Melanie put it. It was pink, like this candy pink with like hearts and sparkles, and these two characters on the front who I had no idea who they even were. They didn't match anyone in the book. And I saw the email where he had sent me the draft of the cover, and I was just, horrified, absolutely. I've never been through this process before, but I knew that could not be the cover of my book. You were there, of course. You heard all of this. So my wonderful boyfriend mentioned that there's a site called 99 Designs where you can host a contest for graphic design projects. So I decided I need to, again, that was the cover they had given me was simply not going to be the cover for my book. It just wasn't going to happen. And so I sponsored a contest on 99 Designs. I said, design the cover of the next women's fiction novel all your friends will be reading. And I got over 150 amazing submissions. This was the cover I picked. It was the one that initially grabbed me. But there were several others that would have been wonderful as well. And then I had to go back to the publishing company and say, yeah, I kind of wanted to go in a different direction, and how about this? Unfortunately, they were okay with that.
What did the person win? Besides
Money.
Yeah.
Money. And he also did the bookmarks.
So it was a guy.
It was a guy, in Greece. He's credited in the acknowledgments. Costas, he was amazing.
So
Yep.
I have to ask you, when you read a book, you really get into the characters and it's hard for it to be over. How about writing the book? Was it hard for it to be over and be through with your characters?
That's such a good question. Yeah. Well, I think that maybe part of why it took so long to write was that I just enjoyed being in that world so much. There were days, yes, there were a lot of times when I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm still working on this, and I still need to edit, and I still need to cut it down. But there were so many days when I was working on the book in New York City where I'd work on it all day in my different coffee shops, and I would realize at the end of the day, I've had a smile on my face the whole day, and it's just because of my characters. And in fact, I'm very character driven as an author, and it was honestly my devotion to my characters and just my determination to get them out into the world that kept me going through the rigorous process of submittals and rejections and everything. But I had in mind, I need to do this for them because they need to be heard. Julia hasn't been seen and hasn't been heard her whole life, and we're gonna get her seen. So
That's a great way to look at it.
yeah.
Did you feel like you were Julia?
There's definitely. I'm not.
As you think through the conversations and
There's
reactions.
There's definitely a lot. She's not me. I definitely bring a lot of me to her, but she's her own person.
But you're acting. You're in your other world.
Yeah. No, things happened in the book that surprised me. I did have the general plot planned, but then things happened. Some of the major scenes I didn't know were going to happen that way. Kind of a major
Does that
scene.
come to you when you're writing or sleeping or?
When I was writing, usually. Yeah, when I was writing. And then some of it was more organic, then some of it was more, premeditated because you have to wrap up loose ends and you have to make sure everything fits together. But I remember one scene I had written that's fairly early on in the book with David Meadow, and I remember I was like, where did that come from? I did not see that coming. So, yeah.
The imagination.
Yeah, it's funny how it works. So, okay, one more question, then we'll go back to the party. Last question.
How many times did you rewrite the book? I know when I write, I rewrite and rewrite and rewrite.
I rewrote a lot, and the biggest challenge was at a certain point, I had an agent who was interested, but she said it's too long for the genre. It has to be under 100,000 words, and at that point, it was 135,000 words.
Wow.
So I had to cut it down by a third. And so part of how I did that was there's an amazing writers colony outside of Nashville called Rockvale Writers Colony. So I decided I'm going to book a residency there and just like hammer it out. And I didn't get the whole thing revised at that point, but that chunk of time got me a long way. So
I would say
a lot
that
of
the
rewriting.
people that say books should be short are wrong. If there's great character development and a great story, ask Diana Gabaldon, who writes those Outlander books that, I mean, you can't put down and are over 1,000 pages every time.
Yeah,
Stephen King, thank you. Right on my page, brother.
I tend to agree, and in fact, I definitely plan to do something with the chapters that were not in the book. You know, to do something with them. I'm not sure what, but they're not going to be lost. But I'm with you. I'm with you. I do too. I do too. Yeah. I'll put you in touch with my publisher, and you can
What
get them
was the
straight.
name of that, of the writing place that you went to?
Rockvale Writers Colony.
Rockvale?
Rockvale, yeah, it's in College Grove. Beautiful and very reasonably priced. Just lovely, lovely. Highly recommend it.
Would you ever make a movie?
Oh yeah, hell yeah, hell yeah, yeah.
Who would play Juliet?
Yeah, who would play Julia?
Yeah, it's a good question. Not exactly. We have a volunteer, yeah. You know, I'm the worst on pop culture, so I don't know who, you guys would probably know better than I do these
Meg
days.
Ryan.
Julia
Like
Roberts.
Gwyneth Paltrow is like a kind of an obvious choice, but I think she's
I was gonna say she's
she's
too
too
old now.
old now, yeah,
By the
so
time
a
the movie
younger,
gets made, it's gonna be something we've never heard of.
yeah.
But
Have you started your second novel?
I have started my second novel, yes, it's set in Charleston,
oh, nice.
South Carolina,
I like
yes.
some Charleston.
Yeah, some
That gives you an
Charleston.
excuse to go there for research regularly.
Precisely. My sister lives there, so,
Aha.
yep.
Perfect.
So, all right, well, thank you guys so much for coming out. There's a whole table of books.